jobs saved and services kept, the American Rescue Plan brings a windfall for local government. How will it help San Diego make a faster recovery? 1 year ago this week, the COVID-19 pandemic really took off. We look back on those consequential days that changed our society. And the leader of San Diego's public schools is poised to join the Biden administration. Could Cindy Martin's record on sexual harassment and transparency be an issue with those deciding her nomination? I'm Andrew Bowen, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now.
Now on The Finest. In San Diego and beyond, Our Lady of Guadalupe has morphed in meaning and form over the past 500 years.
She can be a source of comfort. She can be a source of pain. Her power comes because she has all of these different facets to her.
Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Andrew Bowen. Joining me on this remote edition of the KPBS Roundtable are David Garrick, who covers City Hall for the San Diego Union-Tribune, Taryn Mento, KPBS health reporter, and Kayla Jimenez, reporter for The Voice of San Diego. Congress gave final approval this week to the American Rescue Plan, President Biden's COVID-19 relief bill. The package totals nearly $2 trillion, and it includes direct aid to states and cities, which were grappling with the pandemic's toll on the tax revenues that pay for everything from police to libraries to road repair. San Diego's budget, with its heavy reliance on tourism, has been especially hard hit. But Mayor Todd Gloria is breathing a sigh of relief, knowing that help is on the way. David Garrick from the San Diego Union-Tribune joins us now to discuss the details of this new development. Hello, David.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with a big number. How much money will the city of San Diego receive from this stimulus bill, and is that enough to make it financially whole?
It's somewhere between $280 million and $300 million, which is definitely enough. The city's facing about a $240 million deficit if you combine the ongoing fiscal year and the next fiscal year. So they could have $40 to $60 million extra beyond making themselves whole.
Well, Mayor Todd Gloria stepped into office with this massive deficit looming over him, more than $200 million you mentioned. Now, how is he reacting to the passage of the American Rescue Plan?
He says it's transformational, and he's excited that the city probably won't be able to have to make any cuts that the public will actually see or experience. And as you point out, I mean, it was kind of a rough situation to come into office. He was anticipating being mayor for a long time, and to come in with this huge deficit over his head. So now he can really sort of focus on the things that he wanted to prioritize, like homelessness, climate action plan, a new franchise agreement for energy, maybe getting rid of SDG&E. And he also was focused on big projects like the development plan for the sports arena area. And, having enough money to keep everything going, the city engine going, it really helps him focus on other stuff.
Now, I said Mayor Todd Gloria is breathing a sigh of relief, but also breathing a big sigh of relief, I imagine, are city workers who are potentially facing layoffs. David, how does this strengthen their position? Yeah,
well, I mean, it's like night and day. There's 11,000 city workers, and if you're going to have to cut, huge chunks of your budget out, obviously some of those are going to have to be workers. So they've gone from a position of worrying about their jobs, a lot of them, to now potentially they could be lobbying for pay increases. The city's long-term financial projections the last year or so have shown no pay increases because they knew that the economy and the city revenue was so down. But now that they've gotten this another chunk of federal relief, I think raises become at least something that's potentially discussed, as opposed to, 3 months ago, it was like, you're crazy, raises, we have to do layoffs. So definitely shifts the dynamics in a positive direction for all city workers.
What might have happened without this aid? What sort of cuts was the city looking at?
Todd has said that it's similar to the deficits the city faced after the 2008 stock market crash and housing bubble. And that was a situation where the city went beyond just cutting parks and libraries and recreation centers and the arts, which are always sort of the first things to get cut. And they actually browned out some fire engines. Now, I'm not for sure they would have gone that far, but that was on the table, I think. We don't really know specifically what would have been proposed. They were kind of waiting, hoping this federal money would come in before they laid out sort of their list. Police, I don't think there would be fewer officers on the street. I think they would have tried to cut the police budget in other ways, maybe less overtime.
And you mentioned small businesses have a specific set aside in the American Rescue Plan, but the city could also potentially give more aid to them as it sees fit. Many restaurants, bars, hair salons have already closed permanently because of the COVID-19 shutdowns. How impactful do you think the city's funding for small businesses could be to actually boost the local economy?
I think it would be just one small part of, a wider set of things that need to happen. But I think the federal relief probably will be more impactful. But obviously the city plays a role. They sort of set the agenda. I think a key role the city will play is being a booster, when tourism is allowed. And I think they have to sort of re-advertise San Diego as the place to spend after you've spent a year in your house doing nothing. Come to San Diego, sit on our beaches, you're back, COVID is over.
Well, we're about a month away from Mayor Todd Gloria's first official budget announcement. This is for the fiscal year that starts on July 1st. What should residents be watching out for when that happens?
It was going to be massive cuts that were going to be really scary and upsetting, but now it's not going to be. I would say how much he spends on homelessness, what programs in particular he adds there, how much of this extra money he spends on business relief. I guess other ones, it'll be interesting to see. Todd has talked about climate action. He helped write the original city's climate action plan for 2015. He really wants to revamp the way the city approaches that. That always takes money. So I imagine that'll be a key part of it. And this federal money will give him a lot of opportunity to do interesting, innovative things, even maybe not expensive ones, like just small ideas that maybe are something that could be a pilot for something that might work long term.
Now, we've been focusing on San Diego, but really virtually every city in the county has been hurt financially by the COVID-19 pandemic. How big of a boost will this stimulus be for the smaller cities and towns that have been struggling over the past year?
No, I asked the League of California Cities that question this morning. I really want to get the list and see. There was some haggling in Washington, D.C. about the formula that would be used, whether it be based on the revenue that you've lost as a city. There were a bunch of different formulas being haggled. The House was using one, the Senate was using the other. I'm not certain which formula ended up winning out in the end of the day. So that will depend. And as soon as we get those numbers, we're going to report them.
Well, San Diego is predicting that it could take years for the local tourism economy to get back to where it was before the pandemic. Are we out of the woods yet on city budget deficits, or do you think that San Diego could need more stimulus funds down the road?
I wish I had a crystal ball. I think maybe we are, though. I think we're talking about, this is a budget for fiscal year that starts in July. San Diego is going to be in the clear on whatever deficit they're projecting. So that means San Diego is good through June 30th of 2022. If tourism hasn't started to come back by June 30th of 2022, that's kind of surprising to me. So I think San Diego's probably going to be in good shape. May not come back 100% to what it was before, but I think you'd have to guess we'll have a Comic-Con in summer of 2022, and that some of the other events will come back, and that it'll be close enough where it won't be like the sky is falling kind of budget deficit.
And of course, the city has still not touched its substantial general fund reserves, has it?
It has not, and it's been increasing those slowly and steadily over in recent years to sort of meet with the standard practices, best practices. So city actually has much healthier reserves than it did last time around when Jerry Sanders was mayor and the housing bubble hit. So they're actually in reasonably good shape.
Well, certainly good news for all the residents in the city who love libraries, who love all the services that our city provides. Thanks for your reporting on this, David. I've been speaking with David Garrick, who covers City Hall for the San Diego Union Tribune. David, thanks.
Thank you.
You might not remember the first time you heard about the novel coronavirus spreading in Wuhan, China, but there's a good chance you remember this week 1 year ago. The World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. San Diego County issued its first public health order, urging people to avoid large gatherings. The NBA shut down completely when a player tested positive minutes before a game. And Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson announced they caught the virus while in Australia. Joining this week for a look back and an update on the local COVID-19 news is KPBS health reporter Taryn Mento. Hi, Taryn.
Hey, Andrew.
So let's start with the current headlines. San Diego County is likely to re-enter the red tier sooner than expected due to a change in state reopening guidelines. What does this mean for us locally?
Right. So that means that some types of businesses would be allowed to reopen for the first time in months, and others that are currently open but at limited capacity would be able to increase the amount of people that, come in their doors. So retail stores and shopping centers were limited to 25% capacity, but in the red tier, that'll bump up to 50% capacity. Movie theaters could now be open under red tier, indoors, but with limited capacity. And we know even under purple tier, outdoor sports stadiums will be allowed to welcome fans back next month, but again, under limited capacity. But that allowed capacity will grow a little bit under red. And on top of that, though, but like recently what we learned separately kind of from the move to red, that breweries that don't serve food will also be allowed to operate outdoors with modifications, just kind of like how wineries do right now.
Cue the run to local microbreweries for those IPAs we've been missing outside. Now, the latest update to the state's reopening guidelines is meant to push counties to prioritize underserved communities for vaccinations. What are the state and local officials doing to make sure that those groups have access to the vaccine?
Well, at the First, at the state level, the state is setting aside 40% of its doses for the harder hit communities. And these are zip codes that, for a couple of factors, have poor health outcomes. And we've seen a lot of these areas suffer higher rates of COVID. In San Diego, public health officials say, they've been looking at the data from these areas, and that's where they've been placing testing sites. And they're also using that model to place vaccination sites. And so one example is the South Bay Vaccine Superstation, which is in a region that had one of the highest volumes of coronavirus cases. Now, unfortunately, though, when you look at the numbers of who has been getting the vaccinations in the county, a greater percentage is going to the white population over the Latino Hispanic community, which was hit hardest by the virus here. And, one local doctor I spoke to thinks that's more because of hesitation due to historical injustices. So the challenge there is perhaps more about communication. And I know the county is working with community health workers to engage with populations in their native language. And perhaps these are people who understand maybe any cultural differences that may exist from one group to another. So that way it's not just a talking head on a TV telling you to get your vaccine. It's an actual person you know and trust who is having a conversation with you. And there are also a number of other awareness campaigns from other groups that are working with the county.
It's hard to believe that it's been a year since the county announced that the novel coronavirus was spreading here locally. I was actually at that press conference, and I remember the elected officials grouped in a room. They hadn't yet learned how to practice social distancing, even though they were saying that's what people should start doing. In your reporting over the past year, do you get a sense that local leaders would have done differently certain things?
Specifically with masking, I got to say the county and the city were quite quick to put those orders in place. I think the city was earlier than the county, and the county was earlier than the state. I think the county's order came in May. The state was maybe later in June. So they did seem to respond as quickly as they could. But elsewhere in some other cities in the county, there was some resistance to some orders, specifically some enforcement of the closure orders. But Dr. Wilma Wooten has been has stood by a lot of her decisions. And, maybe looking back, there were areas for improvement, but she's really stood behind some of the guidance that we've received down, from the CDC and the state. And has really tried to guide her policies, she said, based on, evidence and what we know works.
A big part of your coverage involves talking with doctors, nurses, our local biotech community that was working for many months on different vaccination efforts. This might be the biggest event in their careers. What has this whole experience of COVID-19 over the past year been like for them on a personal and a professional level?
I think to some degree, there has been a certain sense of fulfilling your duty, that this is, why they do their job, because they're there in a moment of crisis. They're there to support people. They're there to save lives. But I think on the flip side, I think everyone can imagine that it has not been easy, just to put it very lightly. The early months were chaotic. So much was uncertain for them. They knew very little about the illness, how it could affect them, and how they could actually save lives. There was the issue of not having enough access to PPE, changing guidelines on how to use PPE. And so I can imagine that probably made them feel incredibly undervalued at a time when, elsewhere they were being called heroes and major commercials, and then things slowed down and they did get a better handle on treating and managing the patients, COVID patients. But then, the winter surge happened. And if there wasn't a breaking point before then that was definitely it. The sense of just kind of darkness, despair, exhaustion, feeling powerless. And these are people who are just overwhelmed by patients. Some of them, they may be people they actually know just because of the incredible volume of patients. And then they're often the last people to be in contact with these individuals who don't get to see their family members to say goodbye. And, not even just locally, but across the nation, we hear stories about, people being on the phone with their grandparents or their ailing parents, just kind of crying and sobbing and saying, concerned that they were the ones that brought COVID to these patients. And so they have to see and hear those conversations all of the time, and then go home to their families and hope that they're not bringing the illness to them. So I think it's definitely probably one of the most difficult times, but I think in a strange way, they're trying to hold on to how rewarding it may have been, because you hear of them celebrating and how thrilled they are when someone actually leaves and is discharged. And even when they get somebody off a ventilator, because, mortality rates are very high once you're on a ventilator, and it's such an accomplishment for them. And I think they cling to those positive stories.
Yeah, I imagine. 1 year ago, the world changed for us as journalists as well. We've had to adapt to social distancing. How has the pandemic over the past year changed your approach to news gathering and storytelling?
Oh, well, in some ways it has expanded access. Very quickly, everyone suddenly became somewhat tech savvy, I guess you could say, and familiar with Zoom. That meant they were more available because they just had to click a link instead of, driving or meeting me somewhere for an interview. Our audience was also familiar with video conferencing because it affected everyone's lives. So that meant these technical differences with how the interview sounded or looked weren't as jarring to them. So we appreciate our audience for working with us. But because I'm health reporter and the pandemic significantly impacted the medical community, these sources were often far too busy to even take those calls and Zooms. Their communication teams were inundated by every other reporter that, because of the pandemic, suddenly also became a health reporter. And for the most part, I know many tried to rapidly get responses, but there was a lag, from request to when you got your response. And as far as public health and elected officials, both at the state and local levels, they did hold press conferences regularly, which we were able to call into. Which certainly makes it easier on them. But as a reporter, you're reduced to possibly just one question. And this situation was fast moving, complex, and a lot of times uncertain. So we know just 1, 2, or even 3 questions is not going to give us the details that we know our audience is looking for. And I suspect I'm going on too long with my answer, but I do want to say that during these press conferences, I did feel like you could see newsrooms coming together to build on each other's questions to try to get at more answers. You saw that with the UT a few times, and I know our newsroom did that a few times too, multiple people calling in. But you also saw reporters from different stations working together. They'd add to each other's questions, because a lot of the times we were getting after the same information, and it was nice to see that kind of cooperation among competitors. And I just hope that it shows the public how dedicated their journalism community is here in San Diego to getting them, the most information. We even tag each other on Twitter and retweet each other a lot and send private messages of support and kudos. And I've only reported in a few other communities, but I didn't always see that kind of collaboration elsewhere.
Well, I have to commend you for all of your coverage on the pandemic over the past year, Taryn, and it brings me great sadness to share with our listeners that next Wednesday will be your last day as health reporter at KPBS. You'll be moving back closer to family on the East Coast. So thank you so much for all of your coverage, and we're going to miss you.
Thank you. I'll miss all of you guys too.
I've been speaking with Taryn Mento, health reporter for KPBS News, and Taryn, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
President Joe Biden has a long list of reforms he wants to make to education, from bringing back in-person learning to tackling inequities that hurt students of color. And he's turning to San Diego to help him accomplish those goals. Cindy Martin, superintendent of the San Diego Unified School District, is Biden's nominee for Deputy Education Secretary. Voice of San Diego's Kayla Jimenez wrote about Martin's record and how it might become an issue as she prepares for her confirmation hearings. Welcome back to the show, Kayla.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
There's a lot of local control over school districts, but the U.S. Department of Education, the federal government, has a big role to play as well. Tell us what this position of Deputy Secretary of Education involves.
Yeah, thanks for the intro there. So as the end of Superintendent Cindy Martin's term comes to a close, former students, advocates, and attorneys talk to me about how they're worried about her approach to abuse and harassment cases at San Diego Unified will continue to the federal level. If she is confirmed as Deputy Education Secretary, she'll assist the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, who is recently confirmed, and oversee and manage the development of policies primarily surrounding K-12 education policy, like No Child Left Behind, the high school initiative. It's still unclear how much influence she would have on Title IX policy, which is what we're talking about today, but she'll have that role if confirmed.
You and your colleagues at Voice of San Diego have done a lot of reporting on cases of sexual harassment and abuse in San Diego schools. What are some of the cases that stand out to you?
Yeah, we have. It's interesting now to be talking about this on a national stage. There have been quite a few cases that we've covered over the past few years. I think some of the biggest ones stand out from lawsuits that have been filed against the district. And for example, there was one in 2016 where a Crawford High School student sued the district and his former teacher for negligence after he was abused by that teacher, and argued that the district failed to recognize and report grooming signs that led to abuse. And in that case, a jury ended up determining that district officials were negligent in failing to warn, train, or educate employees and students about abuse. And the district ended up paying out for that. And then in the last 2 years, even, there have been 4 separate lawsuits that have been filed against the district that contend kind of the same thing, that the district was negligent in protecting students and that school officials should have intervened sooner.
And what is it about Martin's response to these abuse and harassment complaints that has drawn so much scrutiny?
So district critics like Loxie Gant, who we've reported on quite a bit, she filed a lawsuit with a few other women against the district for the way that the district handled complaints that they made that their physics teacher had groped them and made inappropriate comments. They say that progress that was made under Martin's leadership appeared to come in a reaction to public pressure and those lawsuits, even a federal probe and media reports that had come out, rather than a proactive manner to keep kids safe. And that was their biggest scrutiny, was that it wasn't proactive, but reactive.
Another issue that your article raises is about transparency. How has San Diego Unified helped or hindered the public's right to know about what happened in these cases?
Yeah, so critics who talked to me told me that their biggest concern from Cindy Martin's tenure is the way that the Quality Assurance Office, Title IX Office, other offices at the district are concealing documents around Title IX cases, sexual assault and abuse cases from the public, and that more broadly, it's nearly impossible to obtain any kind of documents from those offices. And I heard from victims and parents themselves that it's even hard for them to get documentation of reports that they've made. So I think the public is concerned that the district is trying to keep cases hidden in the dark, and that kind of makes unclear how the district is handling those cases when they come their way as well. And Voice of San Diego has also raised our own complaints about transparency and why we feel those records are important for the public to see.
In fact, Voice of San Diego is even part of an ongoing lawsuit against San Diego Unified about how the district shares public records. What is at the heart of that case?
Yeah, so Voice of San Diego is in the midst of a lawsuit with San Diego Unified. It's alleged that the district has failed to provide public records in a timely manner and slowed the release of public records in violation of the California Public Records Act. And that's surrounding these cases involving sexual assault and abuse and other cases that we've tried to get from them for a while. We've claimed that the district is abusing its authority authority by slowing the release of public records. To a long degree, it took us quite a while to get any records of substantiated documentation of misconduct by employees. We're arguing that it is important for the district to relay those records in interest of the public.
Now, former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos made some changes to reporting protocols and policies for sexual abuse and harassment at K through 12 schools as well as college campuses. What did she do, and how might that change under the Biden administration?
Yeah, so her policies did ease protections for people who report abuse, and critics say that that hindered protections for those reporting and victims of those crimes that they allege. There was news this week. President Biden on Monday directed the Education Department to conduct a pretty expansive review of all the policies on sex and gender discrimination and violence in schools, including sexual assault and abuse cases, beginning his promised effort that he wanted to dismantle those Trump-era rules of sexual misconduct that afforded greater protections to students accused of assault. But I did talk to a few advocates nationally who say that that is a starting point, but it could take quite a while for those policies to roll back if they do happen.
You mentioned earlier President Biden's Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, was confirmed earlier this month. Do we have a timeline yet for Martin's nomination and when her hearings will begin?
Yeah, as far as I know, there's not a timeline yet. And I know because I've called the Senate committee quite a few times to get that information. But when I do know more about it, we'll write about that at Voice of San Diego. So that's still set to come.
Certainly a lot of stories to keep following, including who will replace Cindy Martin at San Diego Unified as the superintendent. I've been speaking with Kayla Jimenez, reporter for Voice of San Diego. Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you.
That wraps up this week's edition of the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, David Garrick from the San Diego Union Tribune, Taryn Mento from KPBS News, and Kayla Jimenez from Voice of San Diego. If you missed any part of our show, you can listen anytime on the KPBS Roundtable podcast. I'm Andrew Bowen. Thanks for listening, and join us next week on the Roundtable.
Now on The Finest, we examine an icon. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a powerful symbol for 500 years, and artists have reimagined her as a source of resilience and pride. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.